Here we go. Today is Sunday, February 23rd, 2020, and this is episode 246 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kellett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I did come up with our heavy metal rock band name, though.
Yeah? So what's that?
It's going to be Rage Against the Llama.
Wow. That is fancy.
I mean, the jokes write themselves.
Yeah. It's better than my idea of Bullet for my cloud provider, but yeah.
All right. Yeah, maybe that could be like the cover band version.
Yeah, fair enough.
Or the tribute band version.
Fair enough. So just a quick reminder that we're going to be at B-Sides Orlando on April 11th.
Yes, we are, assuming my guts don't decide to implode again. Yes.
And so far, so good.
So far, so good. I really hope that's not an annual event. It shouldn't be. But, we humans look for patterns where they don't exist.
True. Very true. Let's see. Just also a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So
that's fair.
Okay, so let's jump into some stories here. The first one from tonight comes from Dark Rating, and the title is Cybercriminals Swap Phishing for Credential Abuse and Vulnerability Exploits.
Which is surprising to me, I gotta admit.
Yeah, me too. So for a long time, we've kind of been on this incremental climb up the mountain where the main attack vector was effectively social engineering against end users. And what we're seeing here now is that we appear to have started at least reversing that trend a little bit. And now we're seeing much more focus on credential attacks and on vulnerability exploits.
Yeah, this article actually has a lot of really good data points. Now, to be fair, it's one organization's view, and we'll get into that. And no one organization probably has a perfect fidelity of what's going on out there. But it's interesting to see this trend. I mean, I would not have projected it, that we would shift away. Because phishing is so effective. And my belief system is, in general, the bad guys are only as sophisticated and expend as much energy as they need to. So it's interesting. We can get into the stats, and then we'll talk a little bit about takeaways, but I was surprised by this story for sure.
Yeah, so they say phishing in 2019 was 31% of attacks, and that was down from 50% the year before, so pretty significant drop there. Exploits of known vulnerabilities is where I think the real apparent news is, which went from 8% to 30% between 2018 and 2019. And I will say anecdotally that does map with some of my experience, and also some of this, some of the news stories that we've talked about over the past year.
Yeah, and by the way, just to give credit out, this comes out of a report from IBM's X-Force, which used to be ISS's X-Force, which you and I both used to work near. So it's a very different organization these days, but hey, shout out to the old ISS folks.
That's correct. All right, so they point out that last year there were two mainly exploited CVEs in these the vulnerability exploit attacks. One was related to PowerPoint, the other one related to Word. So, one thing that isn't clear to me, and I haven't really had a chance to dig into the details, but are they delineating phishing attacks? So email-borne phishing attacks versus email-borne exploit attacks.
Right, because how do you get to those executables?
Right.
Right. When you think someone's coming at you with exploits or credential stuffing or that sort of thing, you are thinking perimeter gear, like we've seen this huge rise, and I think we got a story on it, in going after VPN concentrators that are on the edge. But if we're talking Microsoft Office applications, the payload or the initial vector still is something, and I don't think they do a good job of telling us what it is here in terms of how that traffic got there. So very well could be malicious born attachments in emails. It could be drive-by downloads on websites. It could be a lot of things, but it could also potentially be internal. Once you've got a foothold, how are people going lateral in the environment?
Yeah.
Although, it gets sketchy at that point. Like, how do you slice the stats up? Is that the same attack? Is that a new attack?
It is interesting that those two CVEs they point to, which date back to 2017, accounted, again, according to this report, accounted for nearly 90% of flaws that spam campaigns tried to exploit. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, these are old exploits.
Yeah,
that have been patched for a long time, and their endpoint. This is what's interesting to me. They're endpoint utilities that aren't being patched. It's not like it's a server patch that, we can't reboot that guy, or we can't upgrade, off of Windows Server 2003, these are just Office patches, which should have very little friction to be upgraded.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, especially in the context of Windows 2010, where the products are being treated more as a service rather than as a point product. So, in a corporate environment, you have a little more control over your destiny in terms of when you update and how you update. But in general, Microsoft is making patching, at least endpoints, much more, not only frictionless, but kind of mandatory.
Yeah, which I somewhat understand. There's a part of me that pushes back against that, but there's a part of me of, hey, we suck at patching, so if we remove the friction of patching, this is kind of the model we're going to as an industry, is auto patching and automatic. This stuff just happens in the background. I don't have to worry about it. Whether it's cloud provider or on-prem or whatever, it's software as a service kind of model. The downside is if somebody blows a patch and now you've got a problem, right? And that's always the pushback you hear from folks. I don't want to patch right away because what if they got a bad patch? And certainly that happens, but it's low likelihood in general. I'm skewed because to me the nail is vulnerabilities and the hammer is patching. So that's my mindset. So, operationally, I have to admit that those operations guys don't want to take down servers and applications with a bad patch. They want to make sure it's good before they deploy it. I do understand that, but there's got to be a balance somehow, some way. Like, I think it was Computer World kept putting out articles every time Windows Patch Tuesday came out of turn off patching because you don't want the patches right away. I'm like, I really don't think that's good advice.
So I do think it makes sense to do some amount of diligence, right? Because there have been some bad patches in the past, but I think there's a fine line between diligence and recklessness.
Yeah, we had a bad patch this month. Microsoft did pull a patch, so it happens. But what's the higher likelihood of impact to your organization? And this is the tough part. And I don't even know how to quantify this. Well, I'm sure there's people out there who do, and you probably do. But how do you quantify likelihood of a bad patch against the likelihood of an unpatched exploit hitting your organization? And not all vulnerabilities are exploited. Not all vulnerabilities are created equal. And there's certainly statistics out there of a relatively small number of vulnerabilities are actually exploited that come out every year. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's something that needs to go into that patching thinking is, what is the likelihood of this being exploited? Is it being exploited? Are we seeing stuff in the wild? Is there a Metasploit module for this guy? That sort of stuff might go into your prioritization. But again, that's a level of maturity and sophistication that a lot of organizations struggle with for lots of reasons. And it's easy to say, but tough to do.
I have a more cynical view.
I'm shocked.
Right? So
when we started this show, I was the cynical one.
Fair enough.
For the record,
you've rubbed off on me, I think. So
there's such a your mom joke there. I'm just going to leave it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to leave it, but I want everyone to know I left it.
Good.
Much like I left your mom.
Oh dear. So if you think about yourself as as an operations person responsible for your fleet of workstations, however large that fleet is, the downside to you is screwing up, right? And if you screw up, if you push out a bad patch, right, you have the potential of pissing off a very large number of people, and in addition to having potentially a whole lot of work that you have to do. And as you pointed out, the contra is that there's some security issue that is that's exploited, and for the most part, I suspect. I mean, obviously incidents are very common, but there's probably the average IT operations person hasn't experienced a massive Sony style or Saudi Aramco style, total obliteration of their environment. And in that case, or that kind of means that the types of attacks that they're probably dealing with are much smaller and maybe limited to individual people who are falling victim to the issue that could have been solved by a patch, and the blame for that goes elsewhere. Right? It's the people who managed the firewall didn't do a good job. The antivirus didn't catch it. The person shouldn't have clicked on that email or visited that website. And so I think there's a bit of a perverse incentive, for operations people. There's only downside to patching too fast, I think, for them.
Yeah, and this is the tough equation that organizations have to work out. I don't know if there's any single right answer.
Yeah. Yep.
But, I'm biased. I admit it. I look at it from the vulnerability standpoint. But you're right. You could also argue, how do we build an organization that's resilient to not being patched? And I think that's a fair argument. And I think we struggle with that too.
Absolutely. So, there's obviously lots that's been written, lots of options to increase the integrity and security of in particular workstations, but also servers. But they all have a trade-off, and none of them are perfect. We have whitelisting and different types of EDR, and again, but they all have trade-offs, and different attackers take great pleasure in bypassing different ones. So,
what I take great pleasure in bypassing?
Yeah. Moving on to the next story, comes from Business Insider. The title is...
Before we jump off this entirely,
yeah.
There were a couple other interesting takeaways about ransomware continues its climb up the ladder, which we've talked about a lot from this report. And they're seeing a lot more targets of operational technology. That's a term starting to come into vogue. It basically means, physical equipment that's run by SCADA sort of stuff, and ICS hardware.
Right.
That they're seeing a lot more attacks against that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that they saw was a big rise in banking Trojans, which I thought was interesting. Again, bad guys want your money. Give me the money.
Yeah, it is unsurprising, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go where the money is. But I think they also point out that there's kind of a blending of an increased amount of blending between banking Trojans and ransomware.
Sure.
So, and probably not very surprising, because the same entry tactics and the same propagation tactics make sense for both types of attacks. So.
Indeed.
All right, now we'll move on to a story from BusinessInsider.com, and the title here is "Hackers Are Getting Better at Tricking People into Handing Over Passwords. Here's what to look out for, according to experts."
Now, quick caveat: this particular story is really targeted more at the mainstream, not necessarily those of us deep in the industry. So just take that with a grain of salt.
Correct. So there was another story that we didn't include, but I think it was from the IC3, indicated that something like $1.7 billion in losses due to business email compromise were reported last year, which is, while a big number, I would venture to bet the actual number is significantly higher from people who are organizations who are too embarrassed to report.
Yeah, I would agree.
So, but the thing that I thought was worth bringing up here was the really focused attention that this article brings to the concept of turning an email-based attack from an outsider to an insider perspective, right? And most organizations these days who are even a little bit sophisticated now do a pretty good job of tagging email as coming from external. If it's coming from outside of the organization, to try to help their employees visually distinguish the source of an email as either coming from outside or inside. And the point of this article here is that the attackers are really adapting to that kind of protection, and the way they're doing that is they're targeting, kind of casting a broad net, and they're trying to find just any way into the organization and compromising an internal email account, and then they try to pivot through the organization till they end up in a place where they can actually leverage the email of the victim that they've currently compromised to get to their intended target, whether that's for blackmail or to actually do the normal attack against the director of finance or what have you. But the point is that they are trying really, really hard to get to a place where these emails are originating from what appears to be a legitimate person inside the organization.
Well, it is a legitimate internal account that's sending it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So they find a low-level person, compromise them in some way, and then start utilizing their account internally to go lateral against whoever their real target is. So they bypass that, hey, it's coming from the outside thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And this really points to the importance of multi-factor authentication. Now that's not a complete savior, because if they compromise workstations, right, and people are signed into their email, it's it's entirely possible that the attackers just use the signed in session. But at least it's a really good attempt at protecting, and as well, it's certainly, if you have email through a provider like Office 365 or Google. Like, I'm not even sure you can have an account now without two-factor on some of those services. But if you don't, geez, you're at grave risk.
Well, yeah, especially when we see so many folks reuse passwords. And right. This is why I just jumping off a little bit. The advice that came out a couple months ago, it might have been last year, about changing the password policies to no longer need people to update passwords, saying, it no longer made sense. It reduced security. I really struggle with that because of the password reuse problem. Mm-hmm. If I could assure that my corporate users were not utilizing their corporate account password anyplace else, then I'd be more okay with that advice. But it's very likely that if they're not changing their password on a regular basis, they're reusing the same password many places, and those external places get popped, and then they come after that with that username and password on your corporate environment. So now you can fix that with things like password managers that allow you to have, make it easier to create unique passwords. You can fix that with two-factor authentication. You could do some other things, but this is why I really bristled at that advice, and I still struggle with it.
Yeah, so that was the updated NIST guidance. It was longer ago than a couple months, but
I have this little gap.
I know. I get it.
I was in jail or something.
Yeah. So, the one of the issues I have, I mean, certainly I agree with that, but much like many things in life, people have picked the parts of that guidance that they like and ignored the parts of the guidance they don't. And as an example, that specific guidance is kind of wrapped in the context of other controls, like other controls to make sure that none of the passwords are being reused or have been compromised, or, out and available in the public. And also, I mean, there's a whole host of context that's intended to be wrapped around that guidance. But what people seem to latch onto is, oh my gosh, NIST says I shouldn't be forcing people to change their passwords anymore.
Because they complain and whine about that. And yeah. And it needs to be taken, their advice needs to be taken holistically, not bits and pieces.
Correct. And by the way, NIST is intended to apply to government systems. Now everybody likes to, follow them because it's generally good guidance. But again, it's intended to operate in the context of the broader context of the 853 framework. So just keep that in mind. So anyway, I think that was the main point I wanted to bring up about this is, it's really becoming very dangerous to operate without two-factor authentication. There's been lots and lots of very high-profile business email compromise cases recently with I forget which local government just had a bunch of money stolen. It is an epidemic problem that we have to get under control. And that the attackers are these are very sophisticated attacks that are intended to separate you and your organization from your money. So watch yourself. All right, moving on to the next story, which comes from KrebsZone Security. And the title here is Hackers Were Inside Citrix for 5 months. So last year, you'll probably remember, this I think happened right around the time.
Jerry, they're not called hackers anymore. They're called undocumented sysadmins.
Administrators, that's right. Sorry.
Please. You show some compassion.
All right. So undocumented administrators were inside Citrix for 5 months.
That's better.
Yeah, this is a follow-up from a story that broke about this time last year, as I recall. And at the time there was not a lot of information. Citrix was pretty tight-lipped about it. Basically said it really only affected our internal business, didn't affect our customer commercial offerings. But I will tell you, from my vantage point, there was a whole lot of hand-wringing going on about what kinds of exposures and risks trusting Citrix was imparting on different organizations. So I think there was some intuitive sense that it all was not right in the world. But so we have a little more detail, not a ton more detail, but the news here is that Citrix sent out letters to some unknown number of people whose data was apparently stolen in the breach. And the letter indicates that the undocumented administrators were active from October 13th, 2018 through March 8th, 2019. And those of you who remember this, there was a lot of hoopla because a kind of an up-and-coming security company apparently notified, I think the company is called Resecurity, looking through here, notified Citrix back in December. So 3.5-ish months before that they apparently kicked the adversary out, the undocumented administrators out. guess they deported them, right? Is that how you would characterize it?
No, they fixed the glitch in payroll.
Oh, okay, got it.
They told them their services were no longer required.
Got it. They fixed the glitch. Okay.
They were like subcontractors.
Right.
Just without the paperwork.
Got it. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to fire them.
That's true. You just block them at the firewall, right?
Yeah, and then they don't file for unemployment. They don't. It's just easier.
If only there were a way to turn their efforts to good, like crowdsourced system administration.
Well, you could say that some of the ransomware guys who are exfiltrating data are doing free cloud backups for you.
Is true. In a way, I guess that's true. Yeah.
This is probably why I will never get a job again. Carry on.
Fair enough. So the again, if we go back to the initial notification or the initial reporting on this incident, as the article points out here, the FBI told Citrix that the apparently Iranian adversary entered their network through password spraying, which is yet another reason why it is very important to use multi-factor authentication. In this case, to get into your environment, which also, by the way, points out how that the perimeter is in fact not dead.
What?
Right?
Not dead yet.
Not dead yet. It's not going to get on the cart. I think the perimeter's going to get up and go for a walk. It's feeling fine.
Stone cold dead in a moment. How many years have we been hearing the perimeter's dead?
I started doing security stuff in the 90s, so it's been since, it was being said back then.
Was that the 1890s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, to be fair, the perimeter is certainly weakened, and the perimeter is a lot more complex than it used to be. But anyway, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's apparently not dead. But it needs two-factor.
Like more cowbell.
Well, yes, just like more cowbell.
I will say, the youngins in our audience aren't getting any of these jokes, and we're being boomers.
Yeah, just search YouTube for "needs more cowbell," and you will have some entertainment for a little while. And also search for I Make Gold Records or gold-plated records. That's also a good one to watch. Christopher Walken was just the bomb on SNL. Anyway,
I completely derailed your train of thought. I'm sorry.
Jesus Christ. Okay,
hey, you keep inviting me back. I don't know why.
Back on track here, Mr. Callett.
Yes, sir.
So password spraying is for those who I think everybody should know what it is, right? But there's just as we talked about 2 articles ago in the actually one of the stats we didn't talk about was the number of records that were breached in like 2019 was a record number, something like 8.5 billion, of which the vast majority were authentication credentials. Basically, typically usernames and passwords. And so what's in vogue, especially amongst the apparently super advanced adversaries, is to actually take those dumps of credentials and quite literally spray them at different authentication systems like VPNs and whatnot. And apparently, it works, right? And this is, by the way, another reason why I think it is important in the context of a business, especially if you're not using two-factor, but you really should be using two-factor to ensure that you're changing passwords, because if those credentials in those dumps, they get out there and they're there forever. And if your people aren't changing them, eventually someone's going to stumble on it, and that is really difficult, by the way, to defend against these password spray attacks, because in the past they would they would hammer on a single user ID, which would then result in that ID being, at least temporarily disabled. But now what the hotness is that they spread out the logins across many different potential user IDs coming from many different sources. So
it's not easy to detect and block,
right?
Those source IPs, without potentially impacting real people.
Yeah, exactly. Thousands of source IPs.
You could get a statistical anomaly detection of, hey, we've had a lot more rejected passwords pop in the past, 2 hours. So you'd be aware of the attack going on. But again, same thing. Unless you're willing to shut down those accounts or those servers or that service, it's almost too late. You've got to have two-factor or something to really defend that. So I think, I think the takeaway for me is anything facing the internet should be two-factor minimum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ideally 14-factor.
Well, I mean, you can't be too secure, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you to decide what 14 factors you want to use.
There's an exercise left to the listener, as they say. All right. The last thing we have is actually linked from the Krebs story, in that this is a report from Clear Sky Security, and this is about the Fox Kitten campaign, and it has a really cute picture of a cat with snow on it.
Hence we covered it.
I mean, look, if you want us to talk about your security report, you cannot go wrong with a cat picture. I'm just saying.
It's true. It's true. And that is not a euphemism. We mean it. Straight up feline.
Absolutely. Black ones, white ones, tuxedos, torties, doesn't really matter. Tabbies, it's all good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We go all ways when it comes to cats.
Correct. I mean, hardcore. So the deal here is this Fox Kitten campaign is kind of to net it out. Apparently, the Iranians, who have a couple of different threat actor groups that I guess this particular report links together through common infrastructure and some common tools. But the interesting aspect of this is the common intrusion, initial intrusion method, which is through VPNs. And so the threat actor here is exploiting what they're calling, what they're characterizing as one-day vulnerabilities, things that have already been patched. But the actor here apparently is pretty adept at exploiting these VPN services, sometimes within hours of the issue being disclosed and a patch being released. So it appears that in almost all cases that I've been able to tell, they're targeting, the threat actor here is targeting VPN devices that have patches for the vulnerability they're using, but oftentimes it's just not enough time has gone by for the patches to get applied. And by the way, it's a security appliance, and we all know that we really don't have to patch security appliances, so it's probably going to be a reliable source of entry for the threat actor for a long time to come. At least that's what I've been told.
Patch velocity. It's a tricky concept.
Correct. So the actor here is targeting Pulse Secure VPN, Fortinet VPN, Global Protect by Palo Alto, and then they also go on to indicate that they anticipate, but it sounds like they haven't actually seen it, the threat actor here using the recent recent Citrix NetScaler vulnerabilities, which probably in hindsight is not going to be a great great thing for them, because, well, they've all been compromised already. So, I mean, there's that, right? So yeah, by the way, if you have a NetScaler that you haven't patched or applied the mitigation to, you have an issue, like a big issue.
But as far as we know, just to go back a story, the compromise of Citrix had nothing to do with the discovery and exploitation of that vulnerability. They were independent events, but it is kind of interesting.
It is interesting, and some part of me, the skeptical pattern-seeking part of me wonders: are they really completely independent, or did they, did someone steal the source code? And
exactly, if you could get the source code, you have a much better chance of finding a vulnerability. Sure.
Yeah. So
at that point, they're really just undocumented source code analysis tools for you.
That's very true. Tools is a good word for them. The report here goes into pretty excruciating depth on the different tools that the threat actor uses, and goes into some detail about how they move laterally. But what they do not do, and this is a bit frustrating for me, is they don't very clearly tell you how they turn the compromise of a VPN appliance into lateral movement within the network. So I suppose in certain circumstances, well, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. That's the thing that is unclear to me. So maybe there's some trust between those VPN appliances and other authentication schemes like Active Directory that they're leveraging. But I didn't read every word in the report, but I didn't see any reference to how that initial step is taken. But they do a lot of kind of the normal types of lateral movement, privilege escalation type stuff, using a mix of homegrown tools and open source tools. Having said that, nothing they do here is particularly sophisticated, right? Notwithstanding what I just described, we don't know how they're getting onto patient zero inside the network. But beyond that, it's pretty standard fare that should be somewhat easily detectable and preventable through a lot of the kind of the normal stuff that we've talked about in the past, things like LAPS and the properly designed Active Directory environments, the what used to be called Red Forest, I forget the new term for it, privileged administrator workstations and so on will help pretty significantly. Plus also things like Defender ATP or some your favorite EDR software can probably pick up and stop most of these types of activities.
Well, yeah, but the other thing about these VPN concentrators is they often have amazing amount of internal privileges through firewalls. So they're a very trusted device. It's a nasty exploit vector to get it to foothold on, because you can pivot into almost anything from at least a traffic standpoint.
Which would be a problem if the perimeter was not dead, right? So since the perimeter is dead, it's really not an issue.
I don't see. No.
Yeah, I mean the perimeter's dead, so it's all good.
Have you had a stroke?
Yeah, I think sometimes I wonder. Anyhow, anything else that you picked up from this thing?
No, I think you hit it. It's kind of interesting. As always, I'm always skeptical because I don't see the raw data, but I think it's always tough to tie it to a specific nation state. You just never know. That's just my only caveat. They say it's Iranians, maybe. But,
well, they do say it's a medium high level of confidence.
Yeah, which is fair. And I really did appreciate that they put in their confidence level on that.
Yeah.
But we also see a lot of folks who outsource their tools and techniques, and I'm not going to get off on that rant today, but it's just really tough to know for sure. And it's also tough once you know, what are you going to do? How does that change your decision making? What does that mean? If it's Iran but I think at a geopolitical level and at an executive level, being able to say, hey, a nation state came after us, gives you some interesting cover that, Billy down the street in his basement came after us doesn't give you.
Yeah, I suspect there's probably some other benefits. I anticipate, and again, this is just my hypothesis, that if the actor is, let's say, organized crime, if you detect them and kick them out, they're probably going to go find someone else. But if it is in fact an actual APT, nation state, and they, for whatever reason, really want what you have on your network, they're probably going to keep coming. And so from that perspective, I think maybe there is some some benefit. And also, if you know who, or if you have a hypothesis on who it is, you may be able to see or do a little bit of research and figure out, well, what other kinds of tactics is this group known to use, and can we increase our level of monitoring on that? The security purist in me says, well, you should be looking for those things anyway. But maybe there's some additional heightened sensitivity you can enable there.
Fair enough.
So, anyway, that is the show for today. I actually have to go get on a plane soon. So, I'm
so sorry. Good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Thank you all to our Patreon donors. You guys are awesome.
Yes, we do really appreciate it. Thank you. Especially sticking with us through my extended medical issues.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
But I got better.
But he's all better. Yep, he's not dead yet. He doesn't have to get on the cart.
You keep trying. I keep saying no.
Okay, Mr. trying to get me to undergo a soul transplant. I don't know what that was about, but anyway, we hope to see you in Orlando on April 11th. If you're going to be in town, look us up, say hi, and with that, we will talk again soon.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.